welcome you in the lecture series of Basics of Communication Engineering. It is 29th lecture of this series. In previous lecture, we have studied about amplitude modulation, pulse modulation, frequency modulation, and digital modulation. In this lecture, I would like to discuss about telephony system. And the outline of this lecture are Introduction to Telephone, Basic Principle and Block Diagram of Telephone Set, Telephone Transmitter and Receiver, and Basic Call Progress. And in the objective of this lecture, you will able to explain the basic concept behind telephone, the basic operation of a telephone transmitter and receiver, and the steps involved in call progress. A telephone is a telecommunication device that permits two or more users to conduct a conversation when they are too far apart. A telephone converts a sound and most effectively the human voice into electrical signals that are transmitted via cable and other communication channel to another telephone, which reproduce the sound to the receiving user. And here tel means far and phone means voice. This means distant voice. Telephone means distant voice. In 1876, Alexander Graham Bell was the first to be granted US patent for the device that produces a clearly replication of the human voice at the second device. This instrument was further developed by many others and became in the business, government and households and the essential element to speak into a earphone receiver which reproduce the voice in a distant location. In addition, telephones contains a ringer to announce an incoming telephone calls and a dial or keypad to enter the telephone number when initiating a call to another telephone. The receiver and transmitter are usually built into a handset which is held up to the ear and mouth during the conversation. The dial may be located either on the handset or on the base unit to which the handset is connected. The transmitter converts the sound wave to electrical signal which are sent through the telephone network to the receiving telephone, which converts the signals into audible sound in the receiver. And the telephones are duplex devices, means they permits transmission and reception in both the directions simultaneously. The first telephones were directly connected to each other and being impractical beyond just a few customers. These systems were quickly replaced by the manually operated centrally located switchboards. These exchanges were soon connected together and forming an automated worldwide public switched telephone network PSTN. For greater mobility, various radio systems were developed for transmission between mobile station ships. Automobiles in the mid of 20th century, handheld mobile phones were introduced for personal services starting in 1973. In last decade, their analog cellular system evolved into digital network with greater capability and lower cost. A traditional landline telephone system, also known as plain old telephone service POTS, commonly carries both control and audio signal on the same twisted pair of insulated wire telephone lines. The control and signaling equipment, that is telephone, consist of the following components: and the handset, switch connection to the telephone system, ringing circuitry, hook switch, dial network. And the block diagram of the telephone set you can see on your screen. Microphone and receiver, means speaker, are commonly known as handset, and the ringer or beeper alerts the user to incoming calls, and the ringer is connected to the telephone lines on the exchange side so that a ringer can be received from the exchange when it is called. The hook switch gives a signal to the central office that the user has picked up the handset to either answer a call or to initiate a call. A dial, if present, is used by the subscriber to transmit the telephone number to the central office when initiating a call. Until 1960s, dial used almost exclusively the rotatory technology, which was replaced by the dual tone multi-frequency DTMF signals, which push button telephones. So the telephone system requests the user of the telephone system when the handset is lifted. It indicates that the system is ready to use by receiving a tone known as the dial tone. It sends the number telephone to be called to the system. This number is initiated by the caller when the number is pushed or the dial is rotated on the older phones. The telephone system indicates the state of the call in progress by receiving tones indicating the status, the ringing tone or busy tone, etc. Telephone system indicates an incoming call to the called telephone by ringing bells or other audible tones. Telephone system changes speech of a calling party to electrical signal for transmission to an distant party through the system. It changes electrical signal received from a distant party to speech for the called party, and it signals the system that a call is finished when a caller hangs up the handset. By means of telephone, conversation may be held over a great distance, and to accomplish this, the sound wave of speech must be converted into the form of energy or electrical wave that can be transmitted efficiently over wires, and these created electrical waves, that is current, or these currents are corresponding to the sound waves. The transmitted waves enter the receivers of a listener's telephone set. The receiver converts the electrical wave back into the sound wave. The listener in his receiver hear the words corresponding to the spoken into the distant transmitter, and this is the basic principle of the transmitter and receiver. You can see in this figure, and here first of all we will discuss telephone transmitter and then a receiver. The function of the transmitter is to convert wave of sound into waves of electrical current. The microphone in the telephone is regarded as the transmitter. It is a transducer which converts the sound energy into electrical energy. There are different types of transmitter, but the carbon granules transmitter is the most widely used in the handset of the telephony. And we will discuss only about the carbon granules transmitter only. And you can see in this figure, it is based on the principle that the resistance of the carbon granules is inversely proportional to the pressure. The construction is in your figure. There is one movable electrode and another is the fixed electrode, and there is between carbon granules, and this is diaphragm, and there is a battery. It is the property of the carbon that its resistance varies with pressure. The carbon transmitter does not produce any EMF but only change its resistance with the change in the pressure. The carbon granules are placed between the two electrodes in an insulated chamber. One electrode is fixed and the other to the back of the chamber, while the other electrode is attached with the movable diaphragm. The two electrodes are connected with the battery. The transmitters offer an electrical resistance to the flow of the current, which is the resistance of the carbon granules when the diaphragm moves inward and outward. Due to the sound pressure, the pressure on the carbon granules also changes, so the resistance of the carbon granules also vary with the changing in the pressure, and so the current flow between the two electrodes are also varies, and the current variation correspond to the sound pressure. And you can see the equivalent circuit of the carbon transmitter as you can see on your screen. The circuit consists of battery B and variable resistance R, which represents the variable resistance of the carbon granules. Let battery has an EMF of 6 volt, and R may be varied from 0 to 1000 ohm with the normal setting of 300 ohm. So the current with 300 ohm, it will be 300 by 6, or you can say 20 milliampere. If the resistance is reduced to 240, then the current it will be 240, and by 6 it will be 25 milliampere. and if the resistance reduced to 200 and the current will increase with 3 milliamperes. So here you can see resistance changes can change the current. Now the telephone receiver, the second reproducer in the telephone is the receiver. The receiver does the inverse function of the transmitter. It is a device which converts the electrical energy into sound energy and operates by the variations of the strength of its magnetic field. The amplitude and frequency of the variation of the magnetic field causes a corresponding variation on the motion of the magnetic diaphragm, and this is the receiver most commonly used in the telephone communication. There is diaphragm, permanent magnet and windings. When the incoming signal current passes through the windings, magnetic flux is produced. The magnetic flux follows the magnetic path, which consists of iron path of the permanent magnet and poles pieces diaphragm and the two air gaps between the diaphragm and the pole pieces. So a varying magnetic pulse is produced, which cause the diaphragm to vibrate in accordance with the signal current received, and so produce the sound. The permanent magnet is used to polarize the receiver. The pull of the diaphragm depends upon the magnetic flux density in the air gap between the diaphragm and the pole pieces. So the maximum change will be produced when the current change in the coil. Now, after these definition and different parts explanation, we can easily understand the concept behind basic call progress, and the progress of the telephone call can be divided into seven phases, and these phases are on hook, off hook, dialing, switching, ringing, talking, and ending. So we will discuss here one by one. The first is the basic call progress. In this first is on hook. Now the first point is on hook in the basic call progress. When the handset is on the telephone system, the circuit is on hook. That is, before a phone call is initiated, the telephone set is in a ready condition, waiting for a caller to up its handset. This state is known as the on hook, and in this state, the 48 volts DC current from the telephone system to the central office is open, and the central office switch contains the power supply for this DC current. Only the ringer is active when the telephone is in this position, and the central office or local exchange connects the end user telephone system with the local loop. This local loop is a single pair of wires connected to the telephone to the central switch offices. Now another stage is the off hook. The off hook phase occurs when the telephone customer decides to make a phone call and lifts the handset from the telephone set. The switch hook closes the loop between the central office switch and the telephone set and allow current to flow. The central office switch detects this current flow and transmit a dial tone from 350 Hz to 440 Hz to the telephone set, and this dial tone signals the customer can begin to dial. There is no guarantee that the customer hear the dial tone right away, so the customer cannot dial until the dial tone is received, and you can hear the dial tone, and the dial tone it may be like this. So next phase is dialing. The dialing phase allows the customer to enter a phone number or address of the telephone at another location. The customer enters this number with either a rotary phone that generates pulses or touch phone push button phone that generates tones. These telephones uses two different types of address signaling in order to notify the telephone company where a subscriber calls. Dual tone multi-frequency DTMF dialing and pulse dialing. These pulse or tones are transmitted to the core switch across a two-wire twisted pair cable. So we can hear the dialing a number. It can be, you can hear like this. So now another phase is the switching phase. In switching phase, the central office translates the pulses into a port address that connects to the telephone set of the called party. This connection could go directly to the requested telephone set for a local call or go through the another switch or the several switches for a long distance calls before it reaches its final destination. And after switching there is another phase, and this is ringing. Once the central office switch connects the called line, the switch sends a 20 Hz 90-volt signal to this line, the signal ringing the phone of the called party. While the ringing of the phone of the called party, the central office switch sends an audible ringing back to the caller, and this ringing back lets the caller know that the ringing occurs at the called party. So central office switch transmits 440 to 440 and 480 tones to the caller phone in order to generate a ringing back. These tones are played for a specific on time, or if the called party phone is busy, the central switch send a busy signal to the caller. This busy signal consists of 480 to 620 hertz tone. So the ringing tone, it can be like this, and the same ringing tone can be here at the called party at the first end where the call is initiated. So this is the phase of ringing. Now, next phase is talking. In the talking phase, the called party hears the phone ringing and decide to answer. As soon as the called party lifts the handset, an off-hook phase start again. This time on the opposite end of the network, the local loop is closed on the called party side, so the current start to flow to the central office switch. This switch detects the current flow and completes the voice connection back to the calling party. And now the voice communication can start between both ends of the connection. Now, last phase is ending the call. The call is ended when either user hangs up the handset. The on hook signal tells the central office to release the line connections. Also, if either telephone handset is hang up, the current loop is opened and the central office release the line connection. And this is the end of this lecture. Here we have discussed about basic principles and block diagram of telephone sets, basic operational functions of the transmitter and the receiver, and the different steps involved in the call progress. And this was 29th lecture of the lecture series of basics of communication engineering. In the next lecture we will discuss about tones in the telephone and the necessity for the telephone exchange. Till then, thanks for listening this lecture. Thank you.